Buying your first home can be a daunting task, especially if there's nothing or no one to guide you through exactly what needs to be done and how to do it. Most home buyers, not only first home buyers, jump in with their feet first without doing the right preparation. No! Today we're going to give you our top 4 tips about what you should do before you start your search.
Welcome to Your First Home Buyer Guide, the podcast for first home buyers who want to move it along and become homeowners. But most importantly, it is for you to become an educated home buyer.
I'm Meighan and that was Veronica. We're both buyer's agents and probably old enough to be your mum. But it's a good thing because between us we've got over 45 years experience to share with you and bucket loads of stories about avoidable mistakes. Together, we're going to make sure you get unbiased and real information you can rely on. Allow us to guide you on your home buying journey. We want you to become an educated home buyer so that you can stop looking for your first home and actually become a proud homeowner.
We've got loads of great tips for you in this episode, and if you'd like more useful tools, head over to the website homebuyeracademy.com.au, and there you'll get access to our free mini course, How to Price a Property Like a Professional. You will also find the holy grail of home buying education, Your First Home Buyer Guide, the online course for people who want to become educated home buyers. We created this for you to help you get on the right path to home ownership for your first home and beyond.
But before we get into the interesting stuff in this week's episode, we've got the boring bit, the disclaimer. You of course know that nothing in this podcast is to be taken as personal advice. We always recommend getting the advice of an expert in their field who takes the time to understand your personal situation. We've done our very best to ensure that the content is correct at the time of recording. Things change rapidly, so always check with the relevant government authority and your trusted advisors to get the most up-to-date information.
Today we're talking about our top 4 preparation tips. And I'm going to tell you a funny little story about somebody I spoke to only yesterday who's done none of these things in a moment though. But before we get to that, what is your special house this week, Meighan?
Oh, I reckon this is probably, if you listen to the media, it probably feels like for some first home buyers, this is all you might be able to afford. I mean, it's such a beat up at the moment, isn't it, with affordability? And it is real in some areas. But this is actually a shack that was built in Siberia, just as a little shelter. Now, I'm guessing there's no air conditioning here and probably no kind of insulation. I reckon it would be a little chilly in the cooler months.
Now, for those of you not watching the video, Meighan does like to put an interesting house behind her. This is literally behind her head unless she moves her head, but it does look like a shag on a rock. It is a little cottage.
Shack on a rock.
A shack on a rock. No, yeah, a shack on a rock. It's a cottage perched on top of a rock in the middle of a lake in Siberia. I don't know. It's got the only outdoor space is a little deck. It's like there's literally uninhabitable other than that.
I think there might be a couple of chairs or a bed in there and that's about it. But it was actually built in 1968. So it has been standing for some time. And it was built by, I think, 3 or 4 co-owners who just wanted a little shelter out there in the
wilderness.
I don't know why.
I'd rather a boat, just quietly. Right. Well, I was going to tell you my funny story. So I had this call from this person into my business, my buyer's agency business in Sydney, and they said, we've recently got married and we're really excited. We've got our pre-approval, we're ready to go, but I'm a bit impulsive. And I said, what do you mean by a bit impulsive? Oh, yeah, we've already made offers on 2 properties. And I'm like, oh, great. So tell me more. And so one of the properties, it's going to auction. They've made an offer. I said, how did you work out what to pay? She said, I just added 10%. Isn't that what you do?
Oh, no.
And I'm like,
the old 10%.
All right. Not only that, when I said, how much did you offer? She told me, and it was actually 1%, not 10%. That made me laugh even more. I'm like, how unprepared can one be? He hasn't worked out how to work out 10% versus 1%. But not only that, it was like, and then it was rejected and it was like, oh, well, then I'm not going to go for that because it's going to auction. And I'm like, that is just the most flippant way of buying a property I think I've come across.
She might like throw the dart first and then see if there's a dartboard to land it on.
Well, that's it. It was like, even if it was accepted, she wouldn't know the next thing to do. But, it just was so, my head was like spinning thinking you've got a lot of money. I mean, if they're buying in Sydney, first home buyers buying in Sydney, they've got a lot of money, got access to a lot of money, must have really good incomes, and yet haven't done pretty much, I said they got pre-approved.
All
but
the
that's,
preparation.
Yeah, all the preparation. Just a disaster waiting to happen. So let's move into those 4 things that you really must do. And look, we talk about 10 steps all the time. This is just the beginning of it all, right? These are 4 things you really must do. If you haven't got these things sorted out before you buy a home, you are in a bit of disaster territory.
Yeah, you're heading towards a rookie mistake.
Yes. So we're going to walk you through that preparation phase. And the very first thing that we do, the very number one thing that you have to get organised is, drumroll, Meighan.
It is to have the right support crew around you. And Veronica, we talk about this. This is the very, very, very first step in the 10 steps in the PACE system, in the course. And it's knowing who to ask is just as important as knowing what to ask.
Yeah.
So it's not only just getting the support crew right, it's actually having the right set of questions, because you can really get yourself into a pickle, but choosing the wrong property or not knowing how much you can actually afford and going to an auction like your friend did there, who came to you for a consultation. Probably feels like she's your friend. But you probably have saved her from a pretty tough situation if she actually had that offer accepted and she didn't know what she was doing or what she should have done beforehand.
Some people are just destined to make mistakes. There are just
a little bit of knowledge is a really dangerous thing.
A little bit of, yeah. I mean, they're too cavalier and they're too confident, and it's like that whole thing. Was it angels?
Something around treading
fools
with.
Rush in where angels fear to tread. That one, right? It's the fool rushing in, right? And that's most people listening to this podcast are not in that category, thankfully.
Well, they want to educate themselves.
Absolutely. So, hats off to all of you. But it's very easy to get waylaid and go in all sorts of different directions because everybody's got an opinion about property. So really step number 1 for us is to make sure that you know who to go to for advice and the right questions to ask them, so you don't have the wrong people around you or you're not getting the right people giving you the wrong advice.
Yeah, plainly speaking, you're going to need a mortgage broker, a lawyer, a conveyancer. Some of you may even need to speak to an accountant if you intend to rent vest or turn your first home into an investment property down the track. These are the people that you need to be talking to before you even think about stepping out into the world of inspecting or looking at the portals or dreaming about what your lounge would look like in that lovely little living area.
So you need to formulate a really good mortgage strategy. And this is just getting all the foundations laid down. You'll be asked about your plans for a property, how long you want to hold it, the facilities you need and more. And
it's more than an interest rate, Veronica. I mean, a lot of people shop around on an interest rate.
Yes.
It's so much more than that.
Way more than that, because a good broker is going to talk about you, not just today, but you in 5 years' time and so on. And they want to make sure that you're set up well for the future. And this is, we've interviewed a number of brokers about this sort of thing. In fact, recently we've had a few recent episodes. So sort of scroll back and look for the ones with brokers where we're really going through all the things that you will need to talk to the broker. It's a very, very important part of the process. A good broker will be able to explain these things to you, like, which bank policies are applicable to your strategy, and it will give them a better idea of what will work for you, right?
Yeah.
One thing I really want to know here, we'll both bang on about this till the cows come home, is that not every question can be answered by your mortgage broker, and yet people will ask brokers questions that are outside their lane, and because they want to help, they'll do their best to provide the information you need. But asking brokers how much to pay for a property is similar to asking a financial planner what property you should buy.
Yes, it's just way outside their area of expertise. Much like investing, knowing who to approach and when will make all the difference. The same thing applies to getting free, or whether you solicit the advice or it's unsolicited advice. If you think about it, really how valuable is free advice? And you and I both say it's worth as much as you paid for it. And if you didn't pay for the advice, then you are the product. Something is being sold to you.
Now, this podcast is free, but we're not giving you advice on this podcast. We're just giving you information, right? And we do know what we're talking about. If you want advice from us, you can join our program. You can buy the course. You can even join us in Campfire every Wednesday, and you can bring your questions to us and we can give you advice, but you're paying for it, right? Not a lot, actually, in the whole scheme of things, not a lot, but you are paying for it. That's the type
Very
of advice
clear.
we're talking about here.
Yeah,
All right.
absolutely. Let's
Step
get on to number 2.
All
Number
right.
2 is to invest in your financial fitness. Now, what in the world are we talking here? Are we downloading an app and doing a daily workout?
Ooh.
Not quite what we're getting into here, because buying a home doesn't have a one-size-fits-all standard strategy. It does have 10 steps that have to be done in the right order so you don't make rookie mistakes. And that, of course, is the 10 steps in the PACE system. Now, if you need to brush up on those 10 steps, we do have a download for that. So we'll put that in the show notes. But everyone's background and financial situation is different, Veronica. And that's why once you find the right people to help you plan your strategy, dealing with the financial aspect of it comes next.
Now, a lot of people have a really fixed mindset around money that is based on flawed thinking. Maybe they've read articles or their parents are giving them well-meaning advice. Like, for example, the old saving, you have to save up for a 20% deposit, and I can't buy anything until then. Well, that's sort of, it's great if you can. But with the right advice, they might realise that they actually need more, maybe less, depending, or less. Some people do actually need more than that, believe it or not, and it's the right thing for them to save up more. And other people can actually buy a lot sooner with a lot less. And this is why having the right mortgage broker and strategy is really critical. But knowing what your goals are, what you need to save for your individual circumstance, and the process that you have to go through to do that, that's what we're talking about here in terms of financial fitness.
Yeah, absolutely.
Not one size fits all.
Yeah. And learning how the world of lending actually works is really important too. You don't have to know the ins and outs. You don't have to know all the bank policies. That's the broker's job. But getting educated on the basics, learning the terms, knowing ways to increase your borrowing capacity. That example of the HEX debt we talked about earlier today, Veronica, when we were having a completely unrelated conversation.
Which
was
is
that in this? Sorry,
no, it wasn't in this
podcast.
Sometimes we have these conversations before we record, and then we forget that we haven't recorded the conversation.
Did we record that or not record that?
No, we didn't. So we do apologise to you all. But things like HEX debts, credit card limits, there's all the talk about financial fitness. These are the things that your broker will advise you on. It might be worth paying it down on in some circumstances if you can. It might be worth cutting up your credit cards. It might be worth doing a lot of things that are going to impact on your ability to borrow the money you need to buy.
So basically understanding how the process kind of works from a pre-approval point of view, being considered as a good prospect by banks, and finally knowing how much you need to maintain a property in the long term can ultimately increase your choices and make your life easier in that long run. There is nothing better than going up the mountain. We talk about this home buying journey being like journeying to the summit. With all the right tools and being financially fit, both in theory and in real life, it really does set you up well.
Absolutely. A lot of people are really scared of having debt. I mean, having your first mortgage is really daunting. And so, again, that financial fitness and knowing that you can budget, knowing that you actually know where all your dollars, where they're going, and knowing you've got a buffer. There's all those sorts of things are in the financial fitness aspect here. So that's really important to get that discipline in your life before you buy property. Number 3. I love this one.
I love this one because we have it all the time.
We do.
Have good, hard conversations with yourself.
Yep. And your partner, if you're going to buy with someone else.
If you're going to buy with somebody else. Imagine, what could your first home be? Where's it located? How much could you potentially spend on it? What features will you have? Veronica, this is the dreamy sort of part, but then you've got to really get a little bit tough with yourself.
You do. Because a lot of people, they tend to take advice and opinions from others about what they should or shouldn't do, where they should buy or where they shouldn't buy, whatever. But they never actually sit and take the time to sit down by themselves or with their partner if they're buying jointly and sort out what they really want without anybody else's biases impacting the decisions. And also there's this whole idea about, the champagne taste and beer income type thing as well. It's like it's all well and good to think you want all these shiny things in your first home, but getting real about what compromises you need to make in different suburbs, etc., and not going and giving up and throwing your toys out the cot because you're not going to get everything you want.
It's a lot of money. It doesn't matter if your budget's 500 or 5 million. There are compromises. We're doing an apartment search for some downsizers at the moment, and their budget is $5 million for an apartment.
In Brisbane, that's a lot of money.
Well, not so much anymore. Yeah,
Oh,
things have gone a little
really?
crazy lately. So what they've been sending us as an example of the sorts of things that they might like have been $6 and $7 million. So it is not just a first home buyer quandary or a conundrum that you're facing when you're thinking, well, I've got to make compromises. Every person in every budget has to make compromises and work out which ones are right for them.
It's a really good point. And the thing is that if you are always looking at what you can't afford, what you can afford looks depressing.
It's never going to satisfy you, is it?
We've got an investor client at the moment, and they've got a really good, healthy budget, and they're an investor. They're not even going to live in it, and we've been, sending them recommendations, but because they've actually been looking online and they've been looking at more expensive properties, they don't like anything we're sending them, and we're like, but those properties are outside your budget. But because when you look online, properties are often advertised at a lower price than what they're really going to sell for, it takes a long time to get your head. So this is the long, hard conversations with yourself. Get real. And there's also outside influences like your parents,
parents who have grown up in a different time, but in places that you think might be a good suburb to live in now. They've got biases that have existed for a long time, and they're probably not based on current reality. So let's say, for example, your parents said you should never live in a certain suburb because it's not nice. You wouldn't want to live there. You should go and do your own research in that. Just on the off chance that their information is a bit outdated, they could be working on stats or knowledge from 30 years ago, and that suburb might actually be a really nice place to buy now, or even up and coming. So showing some of those elements of gentrification.
Now, when I was first a sales agent, so that's like nearly 25 years ago now, and I remember showing an apartment in Balmain. Now, if anybody knows Sydney, they know Balmain is in the inner west. It's 3 kilometres from the city. It's right on the harbour. It's a peninsula. It's got a village. It's like tick, 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 tick. Everybody wants to live in Balmain, right? And this woman, this young woman was looking at an apartment, and she brought her grandmother, and her grandmother lives in Vaucluse, which is very snotty, and that's in the eastern suburbs. And the woman actually looked at me and said, so it's all a bit rough around here, isn't it? And I've like, she hadn't even looked around to see how it had changed in the time. Balmain used to be a very, very rough suburb. That absolutely back in the 70s.
And sometimes they're sort of looking for evidence to support that view, and can't see the trees for the forest. What is it? Can't see the forest for the trees.
Forest for the trees.
Oh God, I'm bad with those analogies sometimes.
You're bad.
But if you're looking for evidence to support a view, you're not looking at what might be different to the view that you've formed or had for a very long time, long-held views.
Now, what was funny about that particular buyer, she took a grandmother. I don't really know why, but she was obviously ignoring her. So, so the idea being, Granny, the market's moved. Things have changed.
Very different. And Vaucluse is not the area that your buyer's probably going to be able to afford in.
Definitely not. Definitely not first home buyer territory in anyone's language. Alrighty.
Let's have a look at number 4, Veronica.
Our fourth thing, have a checklist and know where you can compromise. We've just talked about compromising, but then what you need to do is actually think about what's really important. What are the things you shouldn't compromise on that are right for you, and what you can be flexible on. So knowing what you can and can't compromise on is another thing that you both need to talk about, if it's two of you or one of you on your own. And if you
have that conversation with yourself.
Well, that's it. And if you are buying on your own and you do want a bit of a sounding board, well, there's another good reason to join the program and buy our course and come along to Campfire, because we can be there as your sounding board. But find someone who is trustworthy and not going to give you unwanted opinions, just so you can sound things out sound things off. Now I'm stumbling over what to say. Sound things out with is what I'm trying to say. They're not sound things off, because it's good to have somebody to bounce ideas off. But at the same time,
sometimes when you vocalise, Veronica, is different to what's in your head. You're having a conversation in your head, you vocalise. It sounds really different. And sometimes you look at yourself and go, ooh, oh, wow, I've been ruminating over something that really I just need to move on from.
Yeah, but you need to be real. So it's really just keeping yourself honest. That's what this part of the process is really. What locations are you willing to look into? What do you want versus what do you really need?
Yeah. And if you're buying a property with a partner, make a wish list. So come up with a wish list. What is it that we really like? Do it separately, then come together and workshop it together. because this is a really fascinating thing. One of the things we do in our business buyers agents is we actually need sometimes to get couples on the same page, and they don't even know that they're not on the same page. Sometimes they don't even know how many pages each other has until they're forced to actually talk about it and work out, well, I didn't know that that's what you wanted. We've never talked about that before. So actually having this, well, do it on your own. Make sure you've got all of your thoughts down, so when you come together, you can actually say, oh, I hadn't realised that having a shed to tinker in was important to you. And you can workshop these sorts of things together until you actually start researching and learning about what's possible and available. Everything on that list is just going to be wishful thinking. And that's okay at this stage.
It totally is. And the thing too is that I like to, certainly in our business and with anybody who does our Where to Buy tutorial, which we'll mention in a minute, talk, I guess, in more detail in a minute, we like to say to our clients in our buyer's agency business, we need to know everything you're thinking about, because sort of putting things aside, I know I'm never going to get that or whatever, it can fester there. And certainly if there's two of you, you want to make sure everything's out in the open, because if somebody's really fostering this little quiet little desire for something that they never verbalize, and it can get in the way. And let me tell you, we're doing this for 20 odd years. We know this to be true. So doing the Where to Buy tutorial, it's a great framework to help you have structured conversations around your compromises. And it's only $39. That'll get you started on this whole thing.
It's a great conversation piece. And even if you're on your own, it's a good conversation piece to have with yourself. I know that sounds strange, but it is. It gets things out of your head and onto paper.
It gives you a framework to really work through what's possible for your budget, in what areas, and how you're actually going to be realistic about what you're looking for when you're buying a property. Now, you have to think about the future. You're going to face many challenges along the way. And if you know exactly what you're looking for, where you're going to have to look for it, and the type of money you're going to need to buy it, you're going to be able to make better decisions and avoid jumping into a purchase without a clear plan.
Yeah. Doing these things from the get-go stops the frustration of looking where you shouldn't and not looking where you should. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And if you're spending a lot of time in the wrong place looking at the wrong things, then what you could be buying right now is actually being bought by somebody else.
I know, that's really sad, especially when a lot of people sort of come to us. We encourage people to tell us their challenges, and often the challenge is, but prices are moving so fast, and I just don't feel like I feel like I'm being left behind, right? Being really clear about what you're looking for and where, and really the budget you really need and what's realistic about that will save you from wasting that time and letting other people buy your home when you should be buying it, So it's just incredible. I mean, obviously you don't want to rush out and make the wrong decision or throw yourself into an area that you haven't researched either. So this is all about getting balance, but the clearer you are, the better decisions you're going to make and less time you're going to waste.
Absolutely. And by knowing what you must do before you buy your first home, you're setting yourself up to be aware of potential traps, common mistakes, and be able to avoid them as much as possible. As long as you've got the right people around you, you're financially fit in theory and in application, you set aside some time to sit down with your thoughts and figure out what you want, and then create a checklist to guide you on your research, you will be on the right track from the start.
You certainly will. Now, a quick note, you might think that we cover everything you need to know in these podcasts. A word of warning, we don't. We've just very quickly gone through 4 steps here, but you need to get into the nitty-gritty and the detail to do it properly. We really do just scratch the surface on the podcast. And if you really want to be an educated first home buyer, you need to learn all of the steps, how to do everything in the right order. It makes sense of all of this.
Absolutely. Our first home buyer guide course only costs $990, and you get direct access to us. We've talked about it through the whole podcast, Campfire Wednesday, where we can help guide you through your negotiations or just help you with your thinking. Trust me, you'll overpay by a lot more than $1,000 if you don't know what you're doing. In this episode, we've only touched on a tiny part of the huge amount of things you need to know to become an educated first home buyer. There is so much more for you to do. You can learn all of the steps in the right order and avoid all of the mistakes that others have made in our 10-step online course for first home buyers.
If you'd like to learn more about the right process and avoid making rookie errors, become an educated home buyer. Head over to the website, check out your first home buyer guide, the course that we have created for you. And don't forget to subscribe to the podcast so you won't miss an episode. And if you've liked what you've heard today, please give us an iTunes review. It helps other people find us. And of course, I know it's a bit cringy, but we're going to ask for 5 stars. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us. We hope you've found this really useful. And if you have, please share the love with others who you know are in the same boat. We'll be back next week with more priceless stuff.